When you finally choose to go silent on a narcissist, you are stepping into one of the most powerful acts of self-preservation you will ever experience. For so long, you may have felt like your voice didn't matter, that your boundaries were porous, and that no matter how much you explained, defended, or pleaded, it was never enough. Silence is not about punishment. It is not about a game. It is not about manipulating. It is about reclaiming yourself. A narcissist thrives on attention, on access, on control. When you engage, even in arguments or attempts to clarify, you are still giving them supply. It is fuel for them, and it keeps you in their cycle. Silence disrupts that system. It confuses them, frustrates them, sometimes even enrages them, because for the first time, they are not pulling your strings. And in that moment, you are reminding yourself that you deserve peace more than you deserve another round of exhaustion. But let's be very clear. Your silence is not going to make them suddenly become self-aware. They are not going to sit back and think, "Oh, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should treat this person better." That is the fantasy that keeps so many people stuck, hoping that if they just withhold, if they just disengage, the narcissist will change. That is not what happens. What happens is that the narcissist is destabilized because their usual pattern is interrupted. They may try harder to provoke you, to bait you, to lure you back into the cycle. They may escalate, reaching out with love bombing, promises, apologies, or by creating chaos. Or they may discard you with coldness and cruelty. Either way, the reaction is about them losing control, not about you. And that is the real gift of silence. You get to see the truth. Without your constant participation, you start to witness how much of their behavior was about power, not connection. You begin to understand that love should not feel like a battle. Silence gives you clarity, and clarity gives you freedom. Now, this isn't easy. Narcissistic relationships condition you to be hyper, vigilant, to walk on eggshells, to anticipate their moods. Silence feels unnatural at first because you've been trained to react, to explain, to defend. You might feel guilt. You might feel fear. You might wonder if you are doing something wrong by stepping back. That is the trauma bond at work. The invisible rope that ties you to their chaos, convincing you that disengagement is betrayal. But it isn't betrayal, it is survival. When you go silent, you are teaching yourself something revolutionary. You are not responsible for managing another adult's emotions. You are not required to dance every time someone snaps their fingers. You are not a puppet. You are a person with dignity. Silence is how you begin to remember that. Here's the thing. Narcissists are deeply uncomfortable with silence. They don't know how to exist without an audience, without someone to absorb their projections, without someone to validate them or push against them. They need reaction the way most people need oxygen. So, when you don't react, they panic. They scramble. They may smear you to others, painting you as cold, ungrateful, or difficult. They may project onto you the very behaviors they are guilty of. They may lash out or they may retreat. But in every case, it is because your silence is showing them a truth they cannot bear, that their control is not absolute. And while they are busy spinning in their own chaos, you are growing. Silence is space. Space to heal. Space to breathe. Space to rediscover who you are without the constant noise of their demands and criticisms. Silence is how you step out of survival mode and into self-awareness. It is how you reclaim the parts of yourself that got lost along the way. It doesn't happen overnight. At first, silence may feel heavy, like a weight pressing on your chest. You may want to break it, to send a text, to explain just one more time. But with practice, that weight lifts. You begin to feel lighter. You begin to recognize the power in choosing when, how, and if you will engage. And that is freedom. Freedom they can never take away. So when you go silent on a narcissist, what happens to them is chaos, frustration, loss of control. But what happens to you is healing. What happens to you is empowerment. What happens to you is the slow, steady return of your voice, your peace, and your self-worth. Silence is one of the most misunderstood responses when dealing with a narcissist, because so many people have been conditioned to believe that silence is a weapon or a form of manipulation. But in reality, when you step into silence with a narcissist, it is not about punishing them or trying to play games with their emotions. It is about something much more vital, your self-preservation. For so long, you may have been trapped in the exhausting cycle of explaining, defending, and proving yourself. Every word you spoke was met with dismissal, twisting, or outright hostility. Over time, you may have felt invisible, invalidated, and drained. Silence becomes a way of saying, without words, that you will no longer participate in your own depletion. When you are in a relationship with a narcissist, whether that is intimate, family, or professional, you learn quickly that communication is not about mutual understanding. It is not about dialogue. It is not about resolution. Instead, it becomes a trap because the narcissist uses words as tools to control, confuse, and destabilize you. They bait you into arguments, they twist your statements, they gaslight you into doubting your own perceptions. And every time you engage, you are giving them supply. They thrive on reaction, whether it is anger, tears, or desperation. Its silence cuts off that supply. It says, I will not feed this anymore. Now, choosing silence is not easy. It goes against every instinct you have built up in that relationship. You may feel compelled to explain yourself, to defend against their accusations, to respond to their provocations. That is the trauma bond speaking. You have been conditioned to think that if you do not respond, you are doing something wrong. But that is not true. Silence is not cruelty. It is not stonewalling. It is not abandonment. It is an act of self-care, of stepping back from a dynamic that only harms you. It is the recognition that you cannot keep sacrificing your peace for the illusion of resolution with someone who is not capable of healthy resolution. The moment you stop feeding into their chaos, you start to regain your energy. That is the heart of self-preservation. Narcissistic relationships take a tremendous toll on your nervous system. You may live in constant vigilance. You're waiting for the next argument or the next criticism. You may find yourself overthinking every word you say, rehearsing conversations, trying to anticipate their moods. That state of survival erodes your well-being. Silence interrupts it. It is a way of saying, I refuse to keep giving my life force to this cycle. I am choosing calm over chaos. It is also important to understand that silence does not mean you are powerless. Many people fear that if they go quiet, they are giving up or letting the narcissist win. But the opposite is true. Silence shifts the dynamic because it is the one thing the narcissist cannot control. They cannot twist your words if you are not speaking. They cannot provoke a reaction if you are not engaging. They cannot script you into their play if you step off the stage. Silence is your power. It may not change them, but it changes your relationship to the situation. It gives you space to think, to feel, and to remember who you are outside of their constant noise. There is also a deeper layer here. Silence is not only the absence of words. It is the presence of boundaries. It is a clear, unspoken message that says, I will not allow you to occupy every corner of my mind anymore. I will not continue to hand you my attention, my emotions, and my energy on demand. Boundaries are not always about confrontation or loud declarations. Sometimes, boundaries are simply choosing not to respond. That boundary is not for them to understand. It is for you to uphold. And in that boundary, you preserve the most important resource you have, yourself. Over time, as you practice silence, you start to notice the shift inside you. At first, it may feel uncomfortable, even frightening, because you are breaking a habit that has been ingrained in you through fear and repetition. But as the days pass, silence feels lighter. You start to breathe more easily. You begin to realize that the world does not end when you do not explain yourself. You see that your worth is not measured by how much you engage with their demands. And slowly, piece by piece, you reclaim your sense of peace. Silence is not about depriving someone else. It is about nourishing yourself. It is about stepping away from the noise of manipulation and stepping into the stillness of clarity. It is a reminder that you are not here to be consumed by someone else's needs, moods, and chaos. You are here to live, to grow, to be whole. Silence is how you protect that truth. When you go silent with a narcissist, you disrupt their entire ecosystem. Narcissists survive on what is often called supply. Your attention, your emotions, your reactions, your presence. It does not matter if that attention is positive or negative. Your anger feeds them. Your confusion feeds them. Even your attempts at calm discussion feed them. Any response you give reminds them that they have access to you, that they can pull you back into their orbit whenever they choose. When you take that away through silence, you are essentially cutting off the oxygen they need to sustain their sense of control. And for them, that is intolerable. The first reaction many narcissists have when faced with silence is panic. They are accustomed to being able to provoke you, to elicit some kind of engagement. When that stops, they scramble. They may reach for every tactic they know to get you back into the cycle. They may start with love bombing, showering you with promises, sudden affection, or exaggerated apologies. They will say what they believe you want to hear, not because they have changed, but because they want to reestablish access. If that fails, they may swing to anger, insults, accusations, threats, or attempts to guilt you into breaking your silence. Their moods can shift rapidly because the silence destabilizes their usual rhythm. Another common reaction is baiting. Narcissists are skilled at finding your weak spots, the triggers that will make you break your resolve. They may bring up past mistakes, twist your words, or even involve other people to pressure you. Sometimes they create chaos, spreading rumors, making dramatic accusations, or manufacturing crises, because they know chaos pulls you back in. Anything to break the silence, anything to ensure that you cannot simply detach and stay grounded. Their behavior in this phase is rarely subtle. It is often frantic, because to them, silence feels like rejection, and rejection feels like annihilation. If the baiting does not work, some narcissists move into a colder strategy. They may discard you, acting as though you mean nothing to them, shutting you out with cruelty or indifference. This can be incredibly painful, because for so long, you may have craved their validation, and their coldness can trigger feelings of abandonment. But even this discard is not true indifference. It is another tactic to regain control. They want you to feel desperate enough to chase them, to break your silence, and seek their attention again. Whether through love, bombing, baiting, or discarding, the common thread is this: they cannot tolerate not having control over your emotional state. Understanding this helps you see that their reactions to your silence are not about love, not about connection, and not about loss in the way you may hope. They are about power. Narcissists do not view relationships as spaces for mutual respect and care. They view them as systems of control. And when you remove yourself from that system, by going silent, they react as though their control has been stolen. That is why their responses can feel so extreme, so unpredictable, and sometimes even cruel. But it is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their dependence on your reactions. For you, witnessing these reactions can be both eye-opening and difficult. Eye-opening because you finally see how much of the relationship has been about their need for dominance rather than genuine connection. Difficult because it can stir up guilt, fear, and doubt. You may think, if they are reacting this strongly, maybe I am being too harsh. That thought is a product of conditioning. You have been trained to believe that managing their emotions is your responsibility. But silence is the reminder that it is not. Their reactions belong to them, not to you. Silence exposes the fragility beneath the narcissist's facade. On the surface, they may appear confident, even arrogant, but your lack of engagement reveals the cracks. Without an audience, without someone to manipulate, they are left with themselves. And that is something they cannot bear. Their inflated persona relies on constant reinforcement, and silence denies them that reinforcement. That is why they escalate, why they lash out, why they oscillate between sweetness and cruelty. They are fighting to maintain the illusion of control. As uncomfortable as it may be to witness their unraveling, this is where your power lies. By not responding, you are showing yourself that you do not have to be pulled into their chaos. You are demonstrating that you can survive their anger, their accusations, their attempts to bait you. And each time you hold your silence, you strengthen your boundary. It does not make the narcissist change, but it changes you. It builds resilience, clarity, and the understanding that you are not responsible for regulating someone else's fragile ego. What happens to the narcissist when you go silent is a loss of supply, a destabilization, and a frantic attempt to regain control. What happens to you is the gradual realization that you no longer need to be part of their cycle. You begin to see their reactions for what they are: desperation masked as dominance. And that knowledge is the foundation of your freedom. When you first choose silence with a narcissist, it does not feel like relief. It often feels like weight. It feels foreign, unnatural, and in many ways frightening. That is because your nervous system has been wired over time to respond. You may have been conditioned to believe that not responding means you are being rude, unkind, or even cruel. You may feel guilty, as though you are doing something wrong by not explaining yourself yet again. This is the trauma bond at work, that invisible thread that ties you to their chaos and convinces you that breaking free is betrayal. The truth is, that guilt is not a sign you are harming anyone. It is a sign of how deeply you have been manipulated to prioritize their needs over your own well-being. Silence is difficult because, in the beginning, your mind is still tangled in their web. You may replay conversations, wonder how they are perceiving you, or imagine the stories they are telling about you to others. You may even long for their validation, the very thing that kept you trapped for so long. That longing does not mean you are weak. It means you are human, and you invested yourself in someone who exploited that humanity. Silence forces you to sit with those emotions without running back to soothe their ego, and that stillness can feel unbearable at first. But as you hold your ground, silence begins to shift from discomfort to clarity. In the quiet, you start to notice how much energy was consumed by their constant demands, arguments, and manipulations. You start to recognize that no matter how much you explained, they never truly heard you. You see that all those years of words did not bring understanding, but only gave them more ammunition to twist against you. Silence makes this undeniable. It shows you the futility of trying to win fairness or empathy from someone who is not capable of offering it. Clarity emerges slowly, almost like fog lifting after a long storm. You realize that love should not feel like this constant battle for validation. You recognize that your worth cannot be defined by how much attention you give to someone else's fragile ego. You begin to see that all the guilt, fear, and self-doubt were not indicators of your shortcomings, but symptoms of the environment you were in. Silence gives you the distance to finally see the truth without their voice drowning out your own. And with that clarity comes freedom. Freedom is not dramatic. It does not announce itself in one big moment. It is subtle, gradual, and deeply powerful. It looks like realizing you can go an entire day without checking your phone to see if they have messaged. It looks like having a thought about them and no longer feeling the urge to reach out. It looks like being able to sit in your own company without the noise of their criticism in your head. Each small moment of silence creates more space for you to breathe, to think, and to rediscover who you are outside of their control. This process is not linear. There will be moments when the silence feels too heavy and you may want to break it. You may feel pulled back into the old patterns, the familiar rhythm of defending, explaining, and reacting. That does not mean you have failed. It means you are human, relearning how to exist outside of a toxic dynamic. Each time you return to silence, you are building new habits, new neural pathways, new ways of responding to life that are not dictated by their chaos. Over time, silence no longer feels like absence. It begins to feel like presence, your own. You become more aware of your needs, your values, and your desires. You discover that the world is not as loud, not as threatening, when you are not constantly entangled with someone who feeds on drama. The quiet becomes healing. It becomes the environment in which you rebuild your sense of self. And the longer you stay in it, the stronger you become. Silence teaches you that your peace is worth more than their attention. It shows you that clarity comes not from arguing your point harder, but from stepping back altogether. It reminds you that the voice you most need to hear is your own, not theirs. And in that realization, you move from guilt to empowerment. You begin to believe that you deserve calm. You begin to trust that you can create it. You begin to live in a way that reflects the truth you have always known deep down, that your value does not depend on how much you endure, but on how much you honor yourself. When you stay silent with a narcissist, what happens to them may look dramatic, chaotic, and destabilizing. But what is far more important is what happens to you. In their world, silence is intolerable because it strips away their control. In your world, silence becomes a pathway to something they can never take away: empowerment. While they spiral without the fuel of your reactions, you slowly begin to find a strength that had been buried under years of noise, conflict, and self-doubt. At first, that empowerment is subtle. It doesn't come as a lightning bolt or a sudden transformation. It starts as the smallest shift, the realization that you can make a choice about whether to engage or not. That may seem simple, but when you've been conditioned to respond to every accusation, every criticism, every guilt trip, the act of choosing silence is radical. It is the moment you reclaim agency. It is the moment you stop being pulled like a puppet on their strings and start moving from your own center. As days pass, the empowerment grows. You begin to notice that your emotional state is no longer as reactive. You're not waiting for the next text message or the next outburst. You're not anxiously rehearsing explanations in your head. That quiet you create by going silent is not just external. It begins to take root inside of you. You feel less consumed by their moods, less tangled in their stories. For the first time in a long time, you experience what it means to have your energy belong to you. That is empowerment in its purest form, reclaiming what was always yours. The narcissist, meanwhile, cannot stand the shift. They may rage, they may beg, they may manipulate, but every attempt they make reveals something crucial. You are no longer under their control. And with each attempt you resist, your confidence strengthens. You realize you don't have to explain. You don't have to defend. You don't have to be available at all times to soothe their fragile ego. This understanding builds a sturdiness in you that they cannot touch. What is so powerful about silence is that it gives you space to rediscover your own voice. For so long, your identity may have been overshadowed by the narcissist's demands and criticisms. Your likes, dislikes, and boundaries may have been dismissed, minimized, or ridiculed. In silence, you begin to hear yourself again. You start to recognize what you value, what you enjoy, and what you will no longer tolerate. You begin to trust your intuition, the very intuition that may have been doubted and gaslit for years. This return to self is one of the most empowering aspects of silence. Another layer of empowerment comes through resilience. The first time you stay silent in the face of provocation, it feels shaky, almost impossible. But when you survive it, when you see that the world does not collapse because you didn't respond, you grow stronger. Each time you practice silence, you reinforce the belief that you can withstand their attempts to pull you back. This resilience is not just about dealing with the narcissist. It is about life. It teaches you that you can handle discomfort, that you can tolerate guilt, that you can stand strong even when pressured. That resilience carries into every area of your life, making you more grounded, more self-assured, and less likely to be controlled by anyone. As your empowerment deepens, something else shifts. You stop centering them. Narcissistic relationships often trap you in a cycle where everything revolves around the other person, their moods, their needs, their reactions. Silence flips that. You begin to focus on your healing, your goals, your joy. You redirect your attention inward and outward, not toward them. And in doing so, you take back the most precious resource you have, your time. The hours you once spent defending yourself or analyzing their behavior can now be spent building the life you want. This is why silence is not just absence. It is creation. It is the creation of space for growth, for healing, for self-respect. It empowers you to choose differently, to live differently, to no longer hand over your power to someone who only sought to drain it. The narcissist may remain trapped in their cycle of control and chaos, but you no longer have to participate. You step out, and in stepping out, you step up into a life where your voice, your peace, and your worth are non-negotiable. And so, When you step into silence with a narcissist, it is not about winning or losing, punishing or teaching. It is about choosing yourself in a space where you were always taught to abandon yourself. Their chaos, their anger, their confusion, their attempts to bait you, all of that belongs to them. What belongs to you is the calm you create, the clarity you discover, and the power you reclaim. Silence becomes not the absence of your voice, but the return of your strength. It is the moment you finally understand that your worth has never been measured by how much noise you endure, but by how fiercely you protect your own peace.